Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. This is part 51 of ASP.NET Core tutorial. In this video we will discuss how to seed database table with initial data using migration in Entity Framework Core. At the moment, when we run this sample application that we have been working with so far, we don't see any data on the web page. We don't see any data on the web page. That is because if we take a look at our SQL Server local DB, why don't we see any data here? On the web page, that is because if we take a look at employees table within our SQL Server local DB, go back to Visual Studio and open up your SQL Server Object Explorer, and it is already there, but I will show you how to get it. Click View, and here it is, SQL Server Object Explorer, SSSOX. So it is here, and we get this database now available here. If you remember in the previous video, part 50 of ASP.NET Core tutorial, we used migration to create the database, and we run some commands to create the database, like add migrations and update database, etc. So at that time you did not see this employee DB3 DB34 DB34 available here after using migrations. Why this was so? If you go to the app setting, and why this is now available here, because we have done some setting here in the app setting .json file. Here you can see we have used local DB. So we were using simply here server local at that time, and initial catalog employee DB34, rest were the same. Only here we were using only local instead of local DB. That is why we were not able to see this employee DB34 in the previous video, part 50 of ASP.NET Core tutorial, where we use the migration. Now what we have done, we have simply changed this local to local DB and give the full name of SQL Server. So let me tell you the difference why we were not able to see that employee DB34 earlier. Because in SQL Server Object Explorer inside Visual Studio, the default instance you see is usually local DB slash Microsoft SQL local DB. That is the lightweight local DB instance bundled with Visual Studio. In our app setting file, we were using server local instead of this. We were using, I'll show you that. We were using this connection string. Earlier, we were using this connection string. Okay, server local in our app setting JSON file. So we replace this coding with this coding. Server local DB. Server local points. This server local points to your default SQL Server instance, the full SQL Server installed on your machine, not local DB. That is why the database shows up in SQL Server Management Studio, which connects to the full SQL Server instance, but not in Visual Studio SQL Server Object Explorer. It was not present earlier. Now it is available here because we have used this coding line instead of this one. So remove this. So why local DB throws error? If you change the connection string to server local DB // MySQL local DB initial catalog employee DB34 trusted connection is equal to true, then entity framework core will try to connect to the local DB instance. If local DB is not installed, is not running, or is not accessible, you will get not found error. What you can do, you have two clear options: stick with local, full SQL Server, keep your connection string as is, manage your database in SQL Server Management Studio. If you want to see it in Visual Studio, you can manually add a connection in SQL Server Object Explorer pointing to your full SQL Server instance. This is the full SQL Server instance. Switch to local DB. This is the local DB. If you want integration with Visual Studio SQL Server Object Explorer, update your connection string. So how to update? Update database. After writing this line of code, then you should go to the package manager console and update the database. Means you have to run the command update database. Then you will get this employee DB34 appeared here. This database will be showed here after running the command update database. Okay guys. Make sure local DB is installed and running. You can check by running SQL local DB info in a developer command prompt. If MySQL local DB exists, you can start it with SQL local DB info. In a developer command prompt, if MS SQL Microsoft SQL local DB exists, you can start it with SQL local DB start Microsoft SQL local DB. Recommendation is that since you are already seeing the database in SQL Server Management Studio with local, I had suggest sticking with the full SQL Server instance. This is the full SQL Server instance. Just add that connection to Visual Studio SQL Server Object Explorer. So you can view it there too. So with this addition of full SQL Server instance, we and then update the database, then we are able to see this employee DB 34 created here. Okay guys, we were talking about why we see the empty web page here. This is because if we take a look at employees table within our SQL Server Object Explorer, SQL Server local DB, notice the table is empty. So go to the table and view data. So notice the table is empty. Now what we want to do is seed this employees database table, employees database table with some initial data. If you are using Entity Framework Code 2.1 or later, now there is a new method. Now there is a new method for seeding database table with the initial data, and that is by overriding on model creating method within your application DB context class. Our application DB context class is this app DB context class. Notice when I type the keyword override, notice if when I type the keyword override and then space, we see all the methods. We see all the method. From the base DB context class that we could override, and the method that we want to override is on model creating. This call, so double click this. This call to the database class on method creating method is not going to be anything useful for us. So let's get rid of this line first. So get rid of this line first. And then on this incoming model builder instance, and on this incoming model builder instance, I'm going to call entity of employees. Entities of employee. If you recall, it is the employee tables. If you recall, it is the employees table in the database that we want to seed with initial data. That is the reason we specified its corresponding entity employee right here. So on this, we then call hash data. So on this, we then call hash data. We then call hash data method. It is this method that we use. It is this method that we use to specify the seed data. Let's create a new instance of the employee. Let's create a new instance of the employee. Let's create a new instance of the employee entity and populate all of its properties. This is the new employee entity instance. This is new instance of the employee entity and populate all of its property. Let's set ID equals to 1. ID equals to 1. Name equals to Mark. Department equals IT. Department equals IT, and finally email equals And finally, email equals mark at the rate .com. Now to insert now to insert this seed data into the employees database table, we are going to add another migration. First, let's open the package manager console window. Click on view, other window, and package manager console. Recall the command to add a new migration. It is add dash migration. Recall the command to add a new migration. It is add dash migration. And we have to supply a meaningful name for the migration. I'm going to call this seed employees table. Seed employees table. Because we are specifically using this migration to seed the employees database table. There we go. We have our new migration seed employee table. Let's wait for a while. There we go. Now we have our new migration seed employees table added. Now we want to update our database with this new migration. As you can see, this is the new migration seed employee table. Is added now. Now we want to update our database with this new migration. For that we use update database command. So use update dash update dash database command. Our database is successfully updated. At this point, if we refresh the employees tables, you can go through this migrations, update the database. Okay. At this point, if you refresh the employees table, so go to the SQL Server Object Explorer and view data. Now, if we refresh the employees tables, we see the seed data as expected. Here you can see the seed data as expected. Mark. Okay. So when we refresh the browser, so go to the browser. Here you can see refresh and we get mark. Okay. So when we refresh the browser, we see that same employee record here on the web page. Mark, the name of the employee is Mark. Okay. Now let's say I made a mistake with the seed data. I actually wanted to add an employee with name John. But by mistake I added Mark. So how do I correct this seed data? We use another migration for that. So we basically change the code here. So go back to the Visual Studio. App DB context. So we basically change the code here. We want to add an employee with the name, okay, Mary. We take name Mary. So we change the name. Let's also change the email to mary@surendratech.com. Just change the name to from Mark to Mary. Email mary@surendratech.com. In addition to changing the existing seed data, let's say we also want to add another new employee. We can very easily do that, because if you take a look at this has data, if you take a look at has data, if you take a look at this has data method from the intelligence, notice it is expecting employee array. Notice it is expecting employee array. Here you can say this employee array as a parameter. As a parameter. That's mean we can add as many employee object as we want here. I am actually going to make a copy of this. Make a copy of this. And paste it here. And then change the bits that are required. First, let's change the ID to 2. Name equals John. Department HR. Email. And finally, email john@surendratank.com. At this point, we add another migration. Let's name the migration alter employee seed data. So go to the package manager console. Add another migration. Let's name the migration. So add dash migration. Name the migration alter employee employees seed data. The migration is added. The migration is added. Let's update the database. Next, update database. There we go. Our latest migration is successfully copied. Our latest migration is successfully applied. If you go through the text that we have here, if you go through the text that we have here, you will see the necessary update and insert statement are executed against our employee DB34. Okay. If you go through the text that we have here, you will see the necessary update. And insert statement are executed against our employee DB34 database. So at this point, when we reload this web page, we see the data that we as expected. So go back to the browser. So you can see it here. We see the data that we expect. We have added 2 employees with name Mary and John. Okay. Now, if we take a look at our app.db text, if we take a look at our app.db context class, go back to the Visual Studio. Where is the app.db context class? Here it is. Notice it is a bit cluttered. It is a bit cluttered with this seeding code. If we want to add more seed data, it is going to get even more cluttered. If you want to keep this class, if you want to keep this class clean, we can move this seeding, we can move this seeding code into a separate extension method on this model builder. On this model builder. If you want to keep this class clean, we can move this seeding data into a separate extension method on this model builder class. So first, let's add a class file to model folder. Add a class file. Let's name this file model builder extensions. Model builder extensions. For an extension method, the class has to be static. For an extension method, the class has to be static. Inside this static class, let's create a public static void method. I'm going to name this method seed. Remember, we are creating an extension method for this. For this model builder class. So we use this keyword this keyword and then specify model builder. As the first parameter. Specify model builder as the first parameter. Let's name the parameter model builder. Model builder with the lowercase m. At this point, we can move all this code at this point we can move all this code that seeds the data into our extension method. Now in our app.db context class, we can simply call this extension method seed on the model builder instance. On the model builder instance. So within our app.db context class, we have an incoming parameter. We have an incoming parameter model builder instance. So on this, notice we now have seed method. Now on this, notice we have seed method which implemented as an extension method. Notice now our app.db context class is clean. Notice now our app.db context class is clean. Let's build the solution. Let's build the solution just to make sure everything still works. There we go. Build completed. Build succeeded. Build completed, succeeded. Here is the example code. That seed our employee database table. That's it today in this video. Thank you for listening.